Well, hi there, BillWhittle.com members. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. This is your members only right angle brought to you by your humble selves. And this is going to likely be the very shortest right angle in all of human history.
Oh, no.
On Instapundit, we see a headline that says, "Is Hollywood dead?" Question mark. I say yes. Steve, what do you think?
Yes.
Scott?
I'm still going to their movies. I mean, I don't know actually where these movies are coming from.
That's a no. Okay, so in I guess just because you people and your demand for quality entertainment, let's
or
open
at
this
least
up just a
long
little
entertainment.
bit. Yeah, well, quantity has a quality all its own. The picture that accompanied this report, written by our friend Roger Simon, is a picture of Stephen Colbert and Meryl Streep with their hands over the heart before an evening with Stephen Colbert and Meryl Streep, whereupon they begin to talk about the tyrannical rise of Cheeto Hitler and the fascist hordes of Tea Partiers that are going to be coming to take away their, I don't know, iPods. In any event, we'll be taking away something, that's for sure. But frankly, when you look at this picture that accompanied the article in Pajamas Media of Steve Colbert and Meryl Streep, I looked at this picture and my first thought was, this actually kind of belongs in a museum. Like in a museum, like 100 million years from now, they should resurrect these two skeletons, put them side by side, and say this is what human beings look like just before they went extinct as a species. They just look so dated, so old, so irrelevant, so far behind the times. So, Scotty, let's start with you. I'm beginning to get a very strong sense that you can make a case that Hollywood as we understand it and the movie business as we understand it was essentially a 100-year-long deal that consumed most of the 20th century, but not all of it. Didn't really get into the swing of things until the 20s. So basically from 1920 to 2020, movies and so on were the big deal, started to peak in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and then just a slow decline. But it had been called the art form of the 20th century. It had been called the uniquely American art form. It doesn't seem to be offering much that's fresh and new. And certainly the political whaling from these fossils is not something that is drawing large numbers of young people into the movie theaters.
Well, I think that there is a sense that in which every generation engages in historical revisionism. I had the pleasure of listening to many, many episodes of a podcast that you can get, I'm sure, on iTunes. I got it from Google Play Music, called You Must Remember This. And it is the history of Hollywood's first 100 years. And the woman who puts it together does a lot of research, puts it together in a very engaging manner. And when I listened to that, the way Hollywood used to operate during the heyday when many of the great films were made that set great moral examples for the American public, it was almost as if you were at Yellowstone Park and there was a geyser that was just absolutely filled with human waste. And then occasionally this geyser exploded and cotton candy came out of it. And somehow edible cotton candy came out of it, but it was a geyser that under the subterranean area was just nothing but a septic tank. And so, I don't want to be too, sort of polishing up something in the past that wasn't really what it appeared to be. However, I think Hollywood has kind of condemned itself to irrelevancy by the way it's behaved. It has decided to carve out smaller and smaller audiences for itself because essentially they got focused more on pleasing the critics and pleasing their own little social circles, the kind of cocktail party set or the line of cocaine on a mirror set or whoever it is that they're trying to please. And it reminds me of when I worked for a company that sold lighting and electrical supplies, and the guys who pitched advertising to the owners of this company found that they could always get them to spend money on advertising if they put the owners in the ads.
Absolutely right.
And the reason for that was because when you put the owners in the ads, then the owner's buddy at the golf course says, "Hey, I saw you in the ad."
Exactly.
At which point the owner says, "Hey, my ads must be working because people are seeing them."
Yeah.
And I think that same thing has kind of happened to Hollywood. It's like they created the kind of entertainment that entertains the kind of people that they hang out with. And so when those people give them feedback and say, oh, what a lovely film that was, Miss Streep, and you're like, well, we should certainly make more films like that. Some of the best movies, as we talked about in our backstage episode right now, are being shot in places like Georgia. I mean, Georgia has put on a full court press from a state government perspective to get as many movies made there as possible. Yeah, and I'm sure other states and cities are doing the same thing. But the real thing that's grabbing the attention of younger people and myself as well is not at the movie theater at all.
This is the point.
I'll bet you I watch 100 hours of YouTube video for every 1 hour of movie theater
easily
video. By democratizing the production process, by giving everybody a cinematic tool like this, they have really the writing is on the wall, and they are weighed and measured and found wanting when I can pull up something more entertaining than most Hollywood films for less than $8 or $10 or $12 a crack or whatever it is these days. So I think they're dead, and but they just don't know it yet.
Could you just briefly recount the story you told in our backstage show about a bunch of your friends getting together?
Yeah, actually, I was together with some family members and just a small group of us, and we had a big TV that was mounted on the wall. We were staying at this Airbnb place, and we had access to all the streaming services, so we could have watched any movie or TV series we wanted. But instead, what we did was we started casting videos from YouTube from our phones onto the TV screen. It's a rather simple process where you just tap it and say, add that to the queue, and then they would come up in sequence. And we spent a couple of hours entertaining ourselves, mostly with comedy videos and music that we were just throwing up on the screen. So we became the network executives who were programming our own channel, and it was a lot easier to watch little bursts of 5-minute Brian Regan routines than it was for us to say, hey, you got 12 people here or 6 people or whatever, you all want to agree on a movie that everybody wants to watch.
I think as a little personal challenge, we should in the description below this video, each one of us include our single favorite YouTube video, just for the heck of it, just so our members can see it.
Okay.
So Steve, here's the question for you. I'm sure most of our members don't know this. I don't think anything except for maybe a few of your closest friends know it. But Scott and I are some of your closest friends, sadly enough to say for you. And we know something about you that most people don't know. And what we know about you is down in the basement of your house in Colorado, there is a cryogenically cooled supercomputer that is a 200 teraflop installation. There's just nothing but the vapors of the liquid nitrogen coming out of the thing, and this enormous, insanely complex, fast, and powerful computing center is used to store your movies on, and that you have essentially every movie ever made at your fingertips. Do you find that if you were to break them down into decades, would you find something that looked like a bell curve?
You know what? I absolutely would. I first actually noticed I've also got a considerable music library, and I noticed my star ratings follow a perfect bell curve. 5% are 1 star, 20% are 2 star, 50% are 3 star, 20% are 4 star, and 5% are 5-star rated songs. Just
what I meant to ask though, would you find? I wasn't clear enough. Would you find a bell curve over time? Would you find that the 60s, 70s were putting in the okay?
Yeah. See, I noticed this with my music library because I'm extremely control freak OCD about my music, and I thought, hey, what about my movies? Well, I don't rate my movies, I just know what I like. And if you look at the decades, the hump of the bell curve is in the 70s and the 80s. Now, a big part of that is because that's when I started watching movies, and you're a kid, and as you grow up and you take on responsibilities that keep you from the multiplex every single weekend like I used to be, your interest in movies, I think, tends to fade over time. A lot of the movies that you tend to watch want to be the ones that you remember so well from your childhood, and at least that's true in my case. Although, giving an actual number, I'm looking at my other monitor here where I keep iTunes up and running 24/7, and it's 2,671 movies. It would take me 199.6 days to watch them all if that's all I did, no sleep or anything. Anyway, I am just old enough that I remember the last. And they're on a Drobo. It's a fancy RAID array. It's very nice. I'm just old enough to remember the last of the Entertainers. Not back when movie stars, TV actors, even singers, they were always on. They had a particular public persona. It's mostly what they portrayed in their movies and films and their music. And when they were on the chat shows, the talk shows, whatever it was, they maintained that illusion. Bill, I think this was something you mentioned behind the scenes, because wasn't Burt Reynolds' alma mater the same as yours? Wasn't he Florida State?
You're really, really pushing your luck now, pal.
Florida State.
Really, really, really pushing your luck.
So
now.
didn't you go to the same school, though?
I did not.
Did not. Okay, so he went to the other one.
I went to the University of Florida.
Okay. He went to Florida State.
And Burt Reynolds went to the Florida State School for Women.
Okay. Well, back when he was Buddy Reynolds and playing football and already losing his hair at whatever school it was, I just remembered Florida. I don't go back east very often. I decided to look up some old clips because I remember watching him not just in the movie. Smoking the Bandit is one of my favorite movies of all time, by the way. But I also remember seeing him on Carson all the time, and he was just such a great guest on Carson. And I can't remember if it was Carson or a guest host who asked him, "Bert, is that your own hair?" And Bert says, "Of course it's my hair. I paid for it." But you never saw him without his hairpiece. See, that's the thing.
He never did.
He was always on. Sinatra was the same way. Apparently, Sinatra could be a pretty nasty piece of work, but when he was on stage, when he was on the talk shows and his albums, he always had that Sinatra thing. These were entertainers. They knew how to sculpt, to mold their public persona, and to maintain that whenever they were in front of the public. And back in the days of the old studio system, the studios worked very hard to protect stars from themselves.
No, that's right.
From having their peccadillos, and I'm being very nice, from coming out in the public. And these days, it's just a parade of crap, isn't it?
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned The Tonight Show, because The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and to a large degree also under Jay Leno, but certainly under Johnny Carson, was a show at nighttime for entertainment that you'd watch for entertainment.
Yes.
Now that Stephen Colbert has the show, it is essentially the Colbert Report, and he's playing to a third of the country, and some small percentage of them are up at that hour.
Yeah,
and the brand is destroyed.
And instead of entertainers with these public personas that you know and love and want to see more of,
we get activists.
You get activists who preach at you. And part of my reason that my movie collection tapers out as we get closer and closer to the present day is I don't want to watch a movie with a lecture. I want to watch a movie with my popcorn.
Okay, there you go. There are so many things to talk about here, folks. The destruction of Star Wars is something that I've discussed at some length. I think one of the things that's most interesting about why Hollywood is dead, or at least in its final death rattle, was probably most forcefully brought home to me by a movie I saw several years ago that I liked enormously. And believe me, I don't recommend movies all that often, but if you have a chance, you really want to see this. It's a movie called The Artist. It's a black and white movie, a silent film. It's done, I want to say, done just a few years ago, 2013, 14, somewhere in there. But The Artist. And The Artist is the story. It's basically A Star is Born. The Artist is a story about a silent film star who meets a young ingenue. She goes on to be spectacularly successful. His career is in constant decline. And the reason that this movie hit me so hard is that in this movie, the men are always in either tuxedos, or they're in dinner jackets, or they're with cravats and sport coats, and this is the 30s. And the women are in dresses and with the hats and everything. And what blew me down was I like these characters so much. The lead actor in that is just so bloody charming. You just love them. The lead actor, you're in love with this guy. You're 30 seconds into the movie and you just say, I'm with this guy wherever he goes. So I started looking at behind the scenes stuff on The Artist, and what I saw an interview with the lead actors, and I thought, where What happened? Here was this man with his hair beautifully combed and slicked back, dressed to the nines, absolutely debonair, pencil-thin mustache, very masculine. She's very feminine. And when you got them on stage as actors, they looked like two children. They were both wearing jeans and T-shirts, and they kind of had their head down like this, and they were just kind of, and it was so disappointing. So
give us the illusion.
Yeah, something. So there's that whole kind of jeans and T-shirt attitude about the same thing with John Hamm, who looks so unbelievably great in Mad Men, and then you see him on an interview and he looks like a teenager out in back smoking a doobie behind the 7-Eleven. And what I think is also particularly kind of interesting is movies are essentially dying just at the time when we finally learned how to make them. I had a very embarrassing experience just a few nights ago when I told my wife how absolutely awesome the Three Musketeers, the 1974 version, was. Just absolute classic. It's so funny. It's so wonderful. It's great. So we teed up that movie and we watched half an hour of that movie. And sometime between last 2 nights ago and when I first saw the movie back in 1974, somewhere in between then, they have remade that movie using
Oliver
the same
Reed.
actors and have made a colossal piece of junk that is just unwatchably bad with the stalest routines and fight scenes that are just ridiculous, laugh out loud stupid. So we finally learned how to make movies and now nobody cares. I think it's because we've picked up so much skill in the visual arts that we've completely dropped the story, and I think that's a fair amount of it too. But I'm much more interested in what the future holds. Because the pop culture is everything. Andrew Breitbart, once again, politics is downstream of culture. Culture for the last century has been controlled by a very small number of very liberal people in one place, all in the same echo chamber. And now it's open everywhere. My favorite stuff on the web consistently is epic rap battles of history, which I'll provide a link to down below. It's very clever stuff. It's very clever stuff. The final thing to say about the death of Hollywood, I think, is this, and this point belongs to Jeremy Boring over at Daily Wire. He said that in the 30s, there was a decision made to legally divest theaters from studios. Paramount Studios used to make movies, and they used to have Paramount Studio theaters where people would go and watch those movies. And people decided that this was a monopoly and monopolies are bad, so they basically cut the direct financial cord between the theater box office revenues and the studio. Now, what that meant was that revenues were going to a third person, and also they started looking for different means of funding. So now, as Scott pointed out, movies are paid for in China, they're shot in Georgia, and it just doesn't matter if Americans want to see them or not because they're not making their box office from there. Jeremy's point was when there were Paramount theaters that you had to put butts into seats in, you had to make movies that the American people by and large wanted to see. But that incentive is long gone. Now, money from China comes in. Tom Cruise gets his $20 million in advance, and so does everybody else. Accountants make sure there is no back-end profit for anybody else to see. And everybody gets paid up front, and it doesn't matter whether the movie bombs because Americans don't want to see it. It just doesn't matter. This is a chicken whose head has been cut off just running around in its final circles. So the future is democratic. The future is more, it's disappointing in many ways. A well-made movie still comes along. We talked about Greatest Showman and Christopher Robin. And they remind you how powerful this medium is when it's employed for the entertainment of the common person rather than their social engineering. But couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of people. I hope they're all out of work very, very soon. And paradoxically, or perhaps you can say miraculously, as this enormous second wave, industrialized, centralized, top-down, theater-run dinosaur of the movie business, as this thing slowly dissolves back into the ashes, the technology to produce that kind of quality is now being disseminated among the entire population of the world. Here in my little studio, I have and I've had for 6 years now, the equipment to edit feature films at 4K resolution. I have a 4K camera over there that allows me to shoot feature film resolution. For the space of 5 figures now, you can do what used to require 7, 8, or 9. And pretty soon it's 4 figures. So Stories will be told. And I think the death of Hollywood is something that's coming not a moment too soon. They turned their back on the American people, and now the American people are turning their back on them. That'll do it for this edition of Right Angle, brought to you by you, wonderful paying members at BillWhittle.com. We're so proud to put up with all of you, that you put up with us, is what I meant to say. And as Scott has pointed out, apparently now our YouTube subscribers, but a few of our members are basically saying, hey, we survived BillWhittle.com 2018, and
we're thinking of making T-shirts.
and this is not the kind of reputation I actually pursue, but it's nice to have people who have the sense of humor and the grace to deal with the problems of mom and pop operations in the face of the man. That'll do it for this week. We'll see you next week on Right Angle.